Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the World Justice Forum 4 in The Hague. It's such a privilege to have you all here. My name is William Hubbard. I'm from the United States, and I have the privilege of serving as chairman of the board of the World Justice Project. I cannot tell you how excited we are to have each and every one of you here today. You represent 125 different countries, and there are over 550 of you here at this forum. The success of this forum is dependent on you. We need your thoughts, your ideas, your energy to make this successful so that we can work together to strengthen the rule of law worldwide. It is you that will make this conference what we hope that it will be. It has the promise of being the best ever, and it has the promise of being something that can really change the world and strengthen the rule of law in a way that benefits all of those around the world, including those who are the least among us. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your participation. It is a privilege now for me to introduce to you and to present to you the founder, president, and CEO of the World Justice Project, Bill Neukom.
Thank you, William Hubbard. Welcome to each of you, and let me add my thanks for your making the time and the effort to be with us here in The Hague, and to thank you in advance for the work you will be doing over the next 3 days. It is my privilege to be able to create a little bit of context for this work and to vacate the stage as soon as possible to make room for our keynote panel, which will be the substantive launch of this week's activities. Rule of law is hardly a modern or a contemporary notion. It has been in the front of the minds of bright, concerned folks for over 3,800 years at least. And to go back to 1772 BCE, we see in the Code of Hammurabi the following quote, "I was called to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, so that the strong should not harm the weak." Coming forward in history, as many of you know, Aristotle concerned himself with this important subject, and just this snippet to remind us, it is more proper that law should govern than any one of the citizens. And from Asia, we have the great political scientist Hunanzi, who said, "If someone disobeys the law, even if he is otherwise worthy, he must be punished. If someone meets the standard, presumably of worthiness, even if he is otherwise unworthy, he must be found innocent. Thus, the way of the public good will be opened up, and that of private interest will be blocked." The Romans, through Cicero, had an awareness of and a mission towards the rule of law. "We are all servants of the laws in order that we may be free," he told them. And more recently, John Locke's famous quote, "Wherever law ends, tyranny begins." We are multidisciplinary. We're all stakeholders in the rule of law. And one of the 20th century greatest scientists, Albert Einstein, said this, "We must learn the difficult lesson that an endurable future of humanity will be possible only if decisions are based on law and justice and not on self-righteous power." And even more recently, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon said this just last fall, "We have to create a world where the rule of law, social justice, accountability, and a culture of prevention will be the foundations of sustainable development and durable peace." It is an arc of intellect that has supported the concept of the rule of law. Some of you may have seen this magnificent statue of Nelson Mandela just outside of the Bel Air Hotel. If you have not, I invite you to make a trip to see it and perhaps to touch his hand. And I will ask you to join me in dedicating this Forum 4 to Nelson Mandela, who was initially the victim of the lack of rule of law during the apartheid regime, spent decades in prison because of his principles. and then was a champion of the rule of law. There was that magnificent moment early in the life of the new Republic of South Africa when he and his cabinet had, in their wisdom, decided to approve a prominent matter. It went down the street to the new Constitutional Court, where our own Arthur Chaskelson was the chief judge, and that court found it to be unconstitutional. And that matter came back up the street to the executive branch, and the press said to the president, who could have done anything he wanted at that time in the life of that country, and they said to him, President Mandela, the court has said this is unconstitutional. They have reversed you. What say you now? And he said, the court has spoken. This is the law of the land. And finally, of course, he is a beacon for all of us, is he not, of the future of the rule of law and its foundational importance to functional and fair communities around the world. The World Justice Project is formed upon just two premises. This is the first premise. It is our belief that the rule of law is the foundation of communities, of opportunity and equity. And by those kinds of communities, we mean communities that afford sustainable economic development opportunities, have an accountable government, and have a respect for fundamental rights of all folk living in that community. What do we mean by the rule of law? There are too many definitions to distract folks from the kernel notion. The World Justice Project for the last 6 years has tried to find a shared notion of the rule of law, and this is where we are. It is just 4 universal principles which we believe are a fair starting point for measuring adherence to the rule of law in communities all around the world without regard to their economic or their political systems. The first of these universal principles is that government and its officials and agents, as well as private actors, must be held accountable under the law. And the second universal principle is that those laws must be clear, they must be publicized, reasonably stable, must be applied evenly, they must be just, which means they must protect fundamental rights, including the security of persons and property. The third universal principle, which infuses the meaning of the rule of law, is that the processes by which those laws are enacted in the first instance, administered by the bureaucracy in the second instance, and enforced by the police and the military and the courts, those processes must be accessible to everyone in the community. They must be fair processes, and they must be efficient processes. And finally, dispute resolution. Justice to be delivered timely by competent, ethical, and independent representatives and neutrals who are of sufficient number, have adequate resources, and reflect the makeup of the communities they serve. If that can be a shared notion of the rule of law, we have to go the next step and ask ourselves, does the rule of law matter? And if so, how does it matter? And we assert respectfully that it matters in at least 3 essential arenas, that it is the underpinning, the foundation for economic development, for political development, and for human development. Some evidence that it does matter in terms of economic development. This graph, which may be a little difficult for you to read on the screen, but it's available on our website, shows that higher per capita income countries are those countries which are more adherent to the rule of law. Or put the other way, rule of law countries enjoy higher per capita income. In terms of political development, don't we all recognize, because of the human instinct for freedom and liberty and accountability in our governments, don't we all recognize a trend towards more open and accountable governments informed by a shared notion of the rule of law, framed in a framework of the rule of law? And these are just 4 examples around the world. There are many others. There are indeed, admittedly, some counterexamples, but there is still a discernible trend, is there not, towards these kinds of governments these days. And thirdly, in terms of human development, this graph shows you that in one of the most critical measurements of the quality and extent of public health, infant mortality, it is those countries which are more adherent to the rule of law at least under our universal principle notion of it, those countries that are more adherent to the rule of law have lower infant mortality rates. And secondly, education, another critical measurement of human development. This graph shows the same thing, that there is more and better education in those countries that are more adherent to the rule of law. The trailing premise of our work at the World Justice Project is that multidisciplinary collaboration is by far the most effective way to advance the rule of law. And you are all here representing over 25 different work disciplines, bearing witness to the fact that we are all stakeholders, that none of us can accomplish what we want to accomplish as well or as promptly if we don't have in our respective home communities this foundation of the rule of law. The World Justice Project has a single mission, and that is to promote homegrown rule of law, not just systems, not just processes, but a culture. We are not exporters, we are honest brokers of information. Our hope is that by providing the data from our index, the learnings from our research and scholarship, and by incubating practical programs, we will help folk determine for themselves what rule of law means to them, and they will build it out into a sustainable culture of the rule of law. And we intend to do that by increasing, first, the understanding by more people of the meaning of the rule of law and why it is foundationally important to affect government reform in the best instances where government responds to the data and reforms itself, and where it will not, where it is petitioned for redress by citizens, by civil society, by businesses, by the academy, and then reforms itself. And thirdly, by this proliferation of practical on-the-ground programs that in some measurable way enhance and extend the rule of law in your home community. We have 3 initiatives, or 3 lines of business: research and scholarship, our rule of law index, and our engagement efforts. These lines of business or initiatives are informing of each other, and they are reinforcing of each other, as this slide shows you. The research and scholarship on the left, engagement on the top, and rule of law index on the right of the screen. Each learns from the other, each contributes to the other, and creates a very strong and stable triangle of purpose. Research and scholarship has had 2 rounds. The first round resulted in these 2 books, Global Perspectives on the Rule of Law and Marginalized Communities and Access to Justice, 2 important subjects within the rubric of the rule of law. And we have just launched, with the help of the American Bar Foundation and a set of key scholars from all around the world, formation of a Rule of Law Scholars Consortium, whose executive committee will be meeting here in The Hague while we are at Forum 4. The Rule of Law Index you will hear about later this morning. It is an assessment tool that measures adherence to the rule of law in 97 countries. It has created and collected all new data, most of it experience rather than perception born, and its content and methodology have been vetted and tested by experts all around the world. It provides reliable, accurate, current data to folks engaged in the advancement of the rule of law. What do we mean by engagement? Our third line of business, it is just these 3 things: building and nurturing a worldwide network for the rule of law. We do that by organizing strategic meetings, of which this forum is a particularly large-scale example, but we also have regional meetings and single-country sorties where we are invited to a country in transition and serve as honest brokers of information to those folks who want to move their governments toward a rule of law regime. And we have program incubation, which is the theme, if you will, and the focus of these next 3 days. What is incubation of these practical programs? It's finding ways to have folks communicate and collaborate in the design and to be prepared for the execution of these practical programs. And how is it done? It's done at meetings like this and the regional meetings, but it is also done increasingly, as I'm sure you will appreciate, by people visiting our website, where we have a fast-growing library describing programs from all around the world in hopes that anyone who visits it who may be curious about a program in her home community might find some inspiration and some guidance for designing and then executing such a program. This is our principal means of bringing these programs to scale. These are just 5 examples of programs that we have had a part of sponsoring, if you will. This shows you the range of the folk who have come together to organize these programs. We have architects and engineers, we have press and public health folks, we have business people, we have environmental experts and the like. The whole range of issues for communities are in some way or another based upon a lack of rule of law or the need for more rule of law. We have work to do, all of us. It is good and important work, and there's lots of it, and I wish you all well in the proceedings that follow this morning. Thank you for your attention.